While Sequel was carrying a stack of papers, someone shouted to get his attention. One of his guild members told him to have a look at this, and showed him his phone. While looking at it, the guild member asked, "Isn't this about his friend from the Yoksamdong incident?" The phone had comments from a public players board talking about a player seeing a ranker on the 39th floor slaying monsters with 2 swords. One of the comments identified the person as the tutorial slayer. After reading it, Sequel couldn't hide a smile from forming on his face, thinking Giju finally made up his mind. Meanwhile, at the Player Association, the president was telling Taeshik that Giju was starting to show himself out in public. And Taeshik replied that it was bound to happen sooner or later since he's got the power now. The president tells him that he has known him for a longer time than himself, but he doesn't see Giju as the kind to show off his strength for self-satisfaction. He probably wanted to show them, and to show his comrades what kind of a person they're following. Now back at the tower, Giju has just entered the 5th trial ground. Preparing for the trial, he called upon each of his egos, the gauntlets Oberon, the black sword Lu, the white sword L, the necklace Rain. Then the system notification informed him of the initiating the special trial. Giju looked around and he saw nothing but pure white space. At that moment, Brunhart complained that Giju forgot to call his name, but Giju reminded him that he was already in armor form, but Brunhart said he could open a gate and call upon his minions to help. However, Giju told him that they had a good chance this trial was something related to L, so undead monsters might be at a disadvantage. Lu complimented him on his good deduction, and Giju asked L how she felt. However, L did not reply or give any kind of reaction. While still trying to get a reply from L, Giju noticed shadows on the ground. When he looked up, he was shocked at the sight before him, since a huge numbers of light swords were hovering directly above him. Then without a moment's notice, the swords come down towards him. Seeing this, Giju wasn't afraid since he has experienced simple attacks like these too many times. As he prepared to defend himself, the swords come down, but none of them were close to hitting him. As the smoke cleared, the swords were simply stuck in the ground all around him. It appeared to look more like a sword graveyard. Giju wondered why all the swords missed him. Were they not aiming for him? This situation looks similar to when he was up against Lu's physical body, who controlled demonic swords. So maybe it's likely he will be up against L's physical body that controls these swords, but Lu interrupted and told him this was different. Get ready for battle. While Giju was confused by these words, the swords on the ground started to shine brightly. As the shine turned into a blinding light, Giju had to momentarily cover his eyes. When he opened his eyes, a huge group of angels with swords were hovering around him. Giju wondered, and Lu confirmed that these were indeed angels. Giju thought so, since there were demons in this world, so angels could exist as well, but they appeared a bit different from what he had imagined, or were they normally not like this? Lu agreed that he didn't know why they looked like this. But anyways, they were in for a long battle. The angels started to descend and charge towards him, while El still remained silent. Meanwhile, back at the elder's house, the elder was examining the remains of the Holy Sword 9. He was wondering what he could do this corrupted Holy Sword, since he is limited to what he can do now that his power of life has been depleted. He was thinking if he only had a perfect Holy Sword to analyze, but at that moment the corrupted Holy Sword started to shake, as if it was square. Somewhere else, Su Yang was finishing up manhandling the caravan guild members. Dropping one of them on the ground, she told Ball it was all done, and for him to read their memories. When Ball didn't respond, she looked over at him and saw him staring off into the distance. She asked him what was wrong, and Ball turned to look at her and told her that the tower was shaking. Meanwhile, inside a training room, Lee Xianho has been in training and has heavily damaged the room. He turns his head and remarks that it's awake. Elsewhere, Giju is facing a large number of angels, and Brunhart comments that there are just too many of them. Giju asked if these angels are strong, and Lu replied that based on their appearance, they won't be able to fully display their strength, but they'll at least be much harder to deal with than the mobs that he has been slicing up until now. After hearing this, he asked El what she thought, and El told him that she felt the same way. Giju thought to himself that El's not usually one for words, but she's been quieter than usual since entering this place. No, maybe it's been since that time. However, before he could ponder more on the matter, the angels quickly approached him. Seeing as he couldn't avoid the tough battle, he charged into the group of approaching angels and attacked them head-on, however to his surprise the angel was able to block his attack. Giju called upon rain, and the wolf was able to do a surprise attack from behind her and brought her down by biting in her neck. But to Rain's surprise, the angel turned into a sword in his mouth. But before they can rejoice, the other angels came swooping down to attack. Giju was having a hard time fighting against these flying opponents, it was becoming so annoying to him. Brunhart remarked it would be nice if they had wings too. Then Lu told Giju that it might be time for them to use his new powers. Giju commented that he told him earlier that he needed time to digest them, but can he really use them now? Lu said with confidence that he could, even though he evolved. This isn't even a quarter of his strength in his prime, but Giju cut him off saying okay, so the new skills were absorption, spirit, fusion, amplification, and summoning, so which should he be using first? But before that, let me get away from these guys first. He shouted for Rain to return, and the wolf went back into the necklace. Then he activated Brunhart's reflect damage ability to blast the nearest angels away from him. Then with some room to breathe, he asked Lu what to do first. Lu told him to use the summoning ability since that one should be fine for now. Getting ready, he used the summoning ability, which can materialize and summon absorbed egos. Lu surged with magical energy and a black and red aura erupted from the sword. At the end it materialized into a form of one of his absorbed ego Cressitu and started to attack the flying angels. Not only him, other egos that was used in the evolution of Lu took form in front of him. They approached the angels and started to attack them as well. They had the skills and fighting movements of their prior life. Seeing the summoned egos, Giju couldn't just sit still and decided to enter into battle with the angels as well. Charging forward and using Cressitu as a launching pad, he flew into the air to attack the angels head-on. After an unknown amount of time, the angels were defeated and only their sword forms came clashing down on the ground. Giju wondered, since all the corpses of the angels turned back into swords, are all angels originally holy swords? Lu told him, not quite, it's not that angels are holy swords, but holy swords are angels. Giju wondered if there was a difference. Anyways, since the battle is over, Giju wanted to have a talk with El now. Since she is the ruler of holy swords, shouldn't she know more than Lu about holy swords and angels? After a moment's silence, El said that they are angels of Prince Dom. They're low-ranking angels who were abandoned because they no longer had a use by the principalities, who are the guardians of the land of angels, Prince Dom. Then Giju asked if this place is a Prince Dom that she was talking about, and El replied that it was not, this place is merely a cemetery, and she thanked him for giving them rest. She is finally starting to remember about them and her duty. When questioned about duty by Giju, the white sword started to glow brightly, almost blinding Giju. When the light disappeared, Giju noticed that El was no longer in his hands. He started to shout for her, asking her where she was. Meanwhile, an angel floated high above him. As his other egos got his attention by shouting Master, he turned his head and looked up. An angelic figure with white hair and glowing white sword was high above him. Giju started to wonder why he didn't realize it earlier, but ever since he entered this place, El hadn't once called him Master. Giju looked at the angelic figure and asked if she was El. In response, she just said that his trial will now begin. Meanwhile, Li Xianho was standing within training room. The two holy swords that he wields were both shaking uncontrollably. He asked them if they were delighted, since it was understandable, since their ruler has awakened. He thought the change was beginning to happen, but he alone was enough to serve the god. Back with Giju, he is standing in front of the angelic figure trying to confirm that she was El, while Brunhart commented that she's way too different from normal. Giju asked what she meant by a trial, asking why she doesn't come down so they can talk. At that moment Lu shouted, "Dodge, you moron!" As soon as he dodged, the spot he was just at was struck by a gigantic lightning strike. Giju was shocked by the sudden attack, and couldn't believe it was coming from El. As the explosion started to clear, Giju asked her why she was doing this, and the angelic figure replied that all angels have a duty, and she is no exception. My duty is to purge, as her eyes lit up with light and she was preparing for another powerful lightning strike. Brunhart was asking her why are you doing this, while Lu just cursed. Giju could only prepare to counter the attack with Lu. As soon as she attacked, Giju deftly dodged and using haste, jumped directly towards her. But before he could reach her, she had attacked again while he was still in midair. This time, since he couldn't dodge in time, he used Lu to directly block the blow. Upon impact, it created a huge explosion that sent him flying backwards. Luckily, he was able to turn himself in mid-air and land on his feet. Lu cursed her for being a traitor and said he knew a day like this would come. Lu was furious and Giju couldn't blame him, considering he was betrayed by his subordinates in the past. Still in the air, Elle raised her sword and started to gather energy for another strike. As the lightning strikes continued to fall, Giju simply dodged the attacks, while Lu was shouting for him to use death and destroy her. Giju told him to calm down, since he couldn't focus because he was so hot-headed. Seeing another lightning strike starting to form, he timed his reflect ability, causing a huge explosion that was able to counter the incoming attack. However, due to her long-ranged attacks from midair, he couldn't get close enough to attack. In that case, he used his summon ability and called upon Cressitu. The gigantic monster that was summoned was able to reach Elle in the sky. As it was about to grip her in his hands, Elle simply used her ability Saint Hole. A black hole was starting to form on the right eye of Cressitu, which started to suck in the summoned monster. Giju could help being shocked, since in an instant his summoned monster was destroyed. Lu complained that Thing's strength is the complete opposite of his, and his total strength is falling behind a lot more than he expected. The other angels earlier were manageable, but he can't handle that level of sacred power coming from Elle. Brunhard asked if the death skill was also useless, to which Lu replied that death was a fundamentally different kind of power and it should work on that traitor as well. Ignoring that advice, Giju shouted at Elle to snap out of it. Didn't she recognize him? However, another lightning attack was starting to form behind him, but Giju continued shout her name, trying to get her to come to her senses. As the lightning came down, it caught Giju by shock, literally electrocuted him on the spot. His other egos shouted at him in worry, as a burnt and completely shocked Giju could be seen after the blast. Lu called him an idiot and told him to get his head out of clouds and get his head back in the game. Lu asked Giju if he was holding on to some childish hope that she'll snap out of it if he shouted loudly enough. If it was that easy to resolve, things would never have turned out like this in the first place. Giju asked Lu what was he supposed to do now, and Lu replied, kill her. You know it deep down, don't you? That this is the only way. However, Giju hesitated, saying but, then Lu retorted saying, but my ass, has he forgotten his opponent is the ruler of the holy swords? Enough with the weak talks of trying to subdue her without killing her. Since if you die, so do all of us who are linked with you. Clenching his teeth, Giju made his decision, calling upon death to make a strike. He combined his powers, haste, acceleration, elemental dark, and binding, to get closer to the angelic figure. Finally, using force, he was poised to make a two-handed overhead strike. Screaming while making his attack, he stared into the eye of the unmoving angelic figure. The more he looked at the face, he couldn't help recall the memories of Elle calling him master. His fighting spirit started to weaken, but suddenly he was struck by an attack. The angelic figure in his moment of weaken had struck his heart with her sword. Meanwhile, at another location, the elder griped his heart in agony. He fell to his knees, clutching his chest in pain. His thought was the link, so it ended up this way. Then bent over and collapsed onto the floor. As the sword was withdrawn from his chest, Giju could only stare blankly at the angelic figure before him. Then fell to the ground, like a lifeless body. His egos called his name, while the angelic figure with Giju's blood on her face looked on. Then suddenly life seems to have come into her eyes, as they were no longer clouded. Regaining control, her eyes saw the motionless body of Giju on the ground. Then she uttered the words with puzzlement, Master. Subscribe to the channel for the next part. Thank you for watching, until next time.